A lot of people think life happens to them. Opportunities show up, problems repeat, patterns form, doors open and close. They call it coincidence. In Hebrew, there is no word for coincidence. Some call it timing. They even call it God's will. But Scripture never describes life that way. The Bible reveals a code so precise that once you understand it, life stops feeling random. Because according to Scripture, nothing enters your life by accident. Everything enters through a gate, and the Bible tells you exactly where that gate is. Let's get into it. For you to truly get this, you first need to understand one Scripture and one word inside that Scripture, because everything hinges on it. So stay with me and give me your full attention here. The writer of the book of Proverbs reveals something most people read past without realizing what it's actually saying. The scripture is Proverbs 4:23. Guard your heart with all diligence, for out of it flow the issues of life. Now notice this carefully. It does not say the issues of life come to the heart. It says the issues of life flow out of the heart. That means Scripture is identifying a source, not a symptom. It is pointing to an origin point, a place where life events begin. The verse is very clear. What shows up in your life is not random, not accidental, not merely external. It comes from somewhere, and Scripture tells you exactly where. Now, before we go any further, we need to clear something up. When the Bible uses the word heart here, it is not talking about the physical organ, and it is not talking about emotions. In the original Hebrew, the word translated as heart is lev, and lev means the inner mind, the seat of thought, the place where beliefs form, the center where conclusions are accepted. In biblical language, the heart is where you decide what is true. So when Proverbs says, guard your heart, it is saying, guard what you allow yourself to accept, guard what you repeatedly assume, guard what becomes normal inside you, because whatever the lev accepts or permits becomes the source from which life flows. This is why the verse says, above all else, guard it. Not above some things, not when it's convenient, above everything. Now, I'm going to take you on a journey through Scripture to reveal something most people never notice. Because if you trace Scripture carefully, you'll see the same pattern repeated again and again. Nothing enters until something is permitted. Life does not break in randomly. Outcomes do not arrive uninvited. Circumstances do not dominate without access. There is always a point of allowance first. This is why Scripture consistently addresses the inner world before it ever addresses the outer one. What is accepted internally eventually appears externally. What is permitted in the heart becomes expressed in life. And once you see this pattern, you stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start asking, what did I allow to take root? Because the heart is not just a place of feeling, it is the gate. And whatever passes through that gate determines the issues of life that follow. Pay attention to these occurrences in the Bible because they are not random stories. They are demonstrations of the same law in motion. From the beginning of Scripture, nothing ever enters a person's life without first passing through the inner gate. Look at the Garden of Eden. The serpent did not force Adam and Eve into disobedience. He did not overpower them. He did not manipulate circumstances around them. He spoke. And what determined the outcome was not the serpent's words alone, but what Eve allowed herself to consider. The moment she entertained the idea, the moment the thought was weighed instead of rejected, access was granted. Sin entered after permission, not before. Now move forward to Numbers 13. The same land is shown to 12 spies, same environment, same facts, same promise. But 10 come back with fear and 2 come back with faith. What entered the nation's future was not based on the land, it was based on what was accepted in the heart. Fear was allowed to settle, and an entire generation wandered as a result. Scripture does not say the wilderness happened to them. It shows it flowed from what they believed. Now look at Jesus' ministry. Over and over again, he says phrases like, according to your faith, as you have believed, your faith has made you well. Jesus never treats faith as effort. He treats it as access. And when faith is absent, Scripture says something shocking. He could do no mighty work there, not because he lacked power, but because there was no permission. The heart was closed. This reveals something critical. Heaven does not violate the gate. God does not force entry into a heart that has not accepted him. and life does not force outcomes into a heart that has not permitted them. That's why Scripture says in another place, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, because speaking is not passive, it is selective acceptance. Now connect this back to Proverbs 4:23. When Scripture says, guard your heart with all diligence, it is not talking about protecting emotions, it is talking about protecting access. What ideas are you allowing to stay? What assumptions are you rehearsing? What expectations are you normalizing? What fears are you entertaining as realistic? Because whatever the heart permits, life begins to organize around. This is why patterns repeat. Not because God is punishing, not because life is unfair, but because the gate keeps letting the same things through. And this is where everything shifts. So the question is not, why does this keep happening? The real question is, what exactly is getting through and how? Because once you can see the entry point, you can stop the pattern at the source. And in the next part, I'm going to break down the scriptural order step by step, showing you exactly how things enter your life and how to close the door on what should never have had access in the first place. Step 1, exposure. Nothing enters your life without first approaching. This is critical to understand. Scripture never presents temptation, fear, or even faith as something that suddenly appears fully formed. Everything begins as an invitation. That's why the Bible consistently speaks in terms of watching, guarding, and being alert. Be sober, be vigilant. 1 Peter 5:8. The word sober does not just mean avoid excess, it means clear-minded, awake, not drifting. And vigilant means actively watching for approach. This tells us something important. Exposure is unavoidable. Entry is optional. A thought arriving is not sin. A feeling arising is not failure. A memory surfacing is not agreement. The test at this stage is not morality, it is discernment. Most people lose here because they confuse exposure with inevitability. They assume if it came to my mind, it must be mine. If I felt it, it must be true. If I thought it, it must mean something. Scripture never teaches that. Exposure is simply something knocking at the gate. What determines the outcome is whether you open. Step 2, consideration. This is where the gate either holds or opens. What you do with what approaches determines whether it remains external or becomes internal. That's why Scripture says, guard your heart with all diligence, Proverbs 4:23. Not guard your behavior, not guard your reputation, guard your heart, because the danger is not the thought appearing. The danger is the thought lingering. This is the subtle moment most people miss. The heart does not open suddenly, it opens gradually. First, you consider, what if this is true? What if this happens again? What if I fail? What if I never change? Then you replay, you revisit the thought, you run scenarios, you rehearse outcomes. And without realizing it, the heart begins to treat the idea as possible, not certain but possible. And possibility is powerful because once something becomes possible internally, it begins to feel normal. Scripture shows this pattern in the garden. Eve did not eat immediately. She considered, she looked, she evaluated. The fall did not begin with action, it began with entertainment. This is why guarding is so important. You don't guard against thoughts, you guard against acceptance. The moment something moves from this, passed through my mind, to this might be true for me, the gate is already opening. And once the gate opens, life begins to organize accordingly. Step 3, agreement. This is the most important step in the entire process because exposure does not create outcomes. Consideration does not create outcomes. Agreement does. Agreement is the moment the heart stops resisting. It may not be spoken, it may not even be conscious, but the heart reaches a conclusion. Scripture says, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Proverbs 23:7. The word thinks here does not mean passing thoughts. It refers to calculation, estimation, final judgment. In biblical language, the heart is where deliberation ends. Once something is accepted as true internally, life treats it as a blueprint. This is why Scripture does not say as a man wishes or as a man hopes. It says as he thinks in his heart. This is why fear produces real results, not because fear is powerful, but because fear convinces. Once fear is accepted as an accurate forecast of reality, the body adjusts, decisions shift, attention narrows, and actions begin to align with that expectation. Life is not responding to the emotion, it is responding to the agreement behind it. Agreement is the inner yes that turns possibility into permission. Step 4, permission is given. Agreement is internal, permission is structural. This is where Scripture uses the word place, nor give place to the devil. Ephesians 4:27. The word place means space, territory, room to operate. Scripture is not saying don't sin, it is saying don't give access. Because once access is given, influence begins. This is how entry becomes practical. Thoughts begin to shape interpretation. Interpretation shapes reaction. Reaction shapes behavior. Behavior shapes patterns. At this point, the thing has not just entered the mind, it has entered the system. This is why Scripture constantly warns about what we allow to dwell, what we meditate on, what we rehearse, what we normalize. Because what is given place begins to feel familiar, and familiarity removes resistance. Once resistance is gone, life no longer needs to push. It flows naturally in that direction. This is how something enters your life without force, without drama, and often without awareness. It wasn't forced in, it was hosted. Scripture never hides how life works. It assumes you understand the gate. Nothing enters your life randomly. Everything enters through agreement. Change the agreement, and life reorganizes. So if this just clicked for you, type this in the comments. I guard the gate. Because once you understand how things enter your life, you stop being confused by outcomes and start living from alignment. If you are blessed by this teaching, click the bell to get more notifications, comment, and share. Check out www.cmm.world and www.cmtheology.org to learn more. Click this link to request your free prophetic ministry time online with our awesome prophetic teams, https://cmworld request for prophetic ministry.